Ladies and gentlemen, please help me welcome Chris Wright.
Thank you for having me today. Thank you for being here. The Righteous Mind is a brilliant book written by social psychologist Jonathan Haidt. In it, he compellingly argues that human decision-making is dominated by emotions. Rational thought, that's a sidebar at best. It's just the way we're wired and the way we make decisions. The problem is, if you take emotions and fashion and they become driving forces in the world energy system, it causes enormous problem. Measured in human lives, thousands of lives, millions of lives. Look at the world today. Look at what's happening. We've had rolling blackouts across Asia, across Europe, heating bills. The rising heating bills is causing political unrest in Europe. This isn't the 1950s, this is today. We have all sorts of factories that are closed, including fertilizer factories around the world, because the natural gas is unavailable or too expensive. You shut down fertilizer factories, now we see the price of food driving up. We're driving up the price of food. We're in the greatest energy crisis the world has seen in decades. We may be just at the beginning of it. But this energy crisis has nothing to do with the scarcity of energy. That's not what's driving it. It's about decision-making. Political policies, ill-informed and destructive political decision-making has led us to where we are today. Why? Why? The mainstream narrative, or at least mainstream among the well-off in rich countries, is that the countries of the world are locked in arms battling an ever-growing climate crisis. If we could get the denying retrogrades out of the way, we'd soon usher in an age of cleaner, cheaper, greener energy. This climate crisis is building, and it's wreaking havoc everywhere, and the greatest victims of it are low-income and disadvantaged people. That's why no action is too bold, no action is too rushed. We have to save humanity. That's the narrative today. That's the narrative you hear in the media, from politicians, even ESG movement in the corporate world. You saw it in the schools there and the kids protesting. It is everywhere. There's only one problem. None of it is true. On the three major points, and I'll break them down, on the three major points, the opposite is far closer to the truth than the narrative. Let's start with the energy transition, that we're barreling on to cheaper, cleaner, greener energy. The energy transition movement began in 1992 with the Kyoto Protocols. 30 years, trillions of dollars of subsidies, countless government mandates. And what's the result? Fossil fuels went from 87% of global energy, plunging all the way down to 83% of global energy in 30 years. Even that 4% change in market share, which is mostly the low-hanging fruit, the electricity sector in wealthy countries, even that little bit has driven up electricity prices, driven down the grid reliability. The United Kingdom and California that have been in the vanguard of this, they've just displaced the energy-intensive manufacturing out of their countries. They still consume the same products, they just import them now. Look, I went to MIT as a young kid specifically to work on fusion energy. After undergrad, I went to graduate school at UC Berkeley in electrical engineering. I worked in solar energy. I worked in next-generation geothermal energy for years, and I am again today. The energy transition isn't failing for lack of effort. The energy transition is failing because energy is hard. Energy is hard. But it's essential to human life everywhere and always. What about the climate crisis? What about the climate crisis? So Fossil fuels started to be meaningful sources of energy a century to a century and a half ago, and they've transformed the world. Human life expectancy has doubled, and the number of people in extreme poverty, meaning living on less than $2 a day, has gone from 90% of humanity to less than 10% of humanity. But did this come with cost? Did this come with trade-offs? Of course it did. From combusting fossil fuels, we've grown the atmospheric concentration of carbon dioxide, CO2 in the atmosphere, by about 50%. From a little less than 0.03% to today a little more than 0.04% of the atmosphere is CO2 today. CO2 together with methane, some other gases, most notably water vapor, absorbs infrared radiation. This warms the planet. The planet's warmed about 1 degree centigrade, 1.5 Fahrenheit, over the last century, over 100 years. And at current warming rates, we probably get another degree centigrade warming by the end of this century. Is that a crisis? Well, the biggest argument put forward that it is a crisis is what we hear incessantly today about extreme weather, the explosion and danger of extreme weather. Now, last year, we had the smallest number of hurricanes in the globe ever recorded in the 40 years of satellite data. You probably haven't heard about that. The year before, we had a lot of named storms, but the total accumulated cyclonic energy, the nerdy way for how much hurricane activity was there last year, was quite low as well. In fact, the summary on extreme weather is that hurricanes, tornadoes, droughts, floods, there's no meaningful trend in any of them. That is from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. You probably haven't heard that either. The most important factor with extreme weather, as the most important factor with everything, is what does it mean to human beings? Deaths from extreme weather. Deaths from extreme weather have dropped by far more than 90% over the last century. This is a century in which the human population has tripled. You probably haven't heard that either, which means for a child born today or living today, the risk of death from extreme weather is perhaps the lowest it's ever been. Yet the fear and anxiety about it has never been worse. 20% of children report nightmares about climate change every day. Terrifying our children with a false and dishonest narrative is one of the things that infuriates me about this movement. Perhaps even worse, I would say the worst of all has been the total disregard for low-income people around the world and in our own countries. This issue of energy poverty. A third of humanity, 2.5 billion people, cook their daily meals burning wood, dung, and agricultural waste inside of their homes. Just the particulate matter, the indoor air pollution from that, kills 2 to 3 million people every year. That from the World Health Organization. If you add in lack of access to simple, clean water, lack of access to basic health care, and malnutrition, we get about 10 million preventable deaths every year simply because of lack of access to basic energy. This is a crisis. This is an absolute human crisis, and it infuriates me that you never hear about it. We never hear about that. You probably did hear that at the last climate conflab, the COP26 in Glasgow, the United States proudly stood up with 20 other countries and committed to the complete cessation of any lending for fossil fuel development in the developing world. Just the thing that can save 10 million lives a year, we said absolutely not, we want no part of that. That is the kind of decision making. I think the people who wrote that declaration or started probably have no idea what they're doing. But this feels good and this is fashionable in today's climate movement. That's deeply disappointing to me. And energy poverty is not just it's not just in poor countries. There, the problem is the most dramatic, the most limiting of people's opportunities for long and healthy lives? The solution to fuel is very simple. It's simply a cook stove. Think of when you go camping or backpacking. It's a propane cook stove and a canister. Internationally, they call it LPG. My company, Liberty, is launching partnerships this year with local businesses in Africa to help them expand, to bring energy access, clean cooking fuels that change their prospects in life. It saves the women in every traditional society over an hour a day walking to collect fuel wood and about an hour a day walking to collect water. It's transformative, but you never hear about it in the messaging today about climate change and energy. In wealthy countries, in the United States, 10% of US citizens have received utility disconnection notice in the last year. A larger percent self-report to keeping their homes at unsafe temperatures. Too cold in the winter, too hot in the summer, to save money to pay for life's other necessities. This is dramatic. Tens of thousands of people, low income, elderly, think retired people, die every winter freezing to death in their own residences. Globally, 5 times more people die every year from the cold than die from the heat. And as the world keeps getting wealthier and society keeps progressing, we're making energy more expensive, and we're growing these tragedies, not addressing these tragedies. My plea is for sobriety. Learn something about climate change. Learn something about where the world gets energy. The world desperately needs sobriety and honest and a little bit of human compassion to solve the real global energy challenges. I wrote a report last year in a corporate ESG report called Bettering Human Lives. I encourage anyone to take a look at it. It goes in these issues in more detail. But I thank you for what you've done today, and I'll end with the words of a friend of mine, Robert Bryce. Energy realism equals energy humanism. Thank you.